Team 2 moves towards the red house, weapons at the ready. Their comms crackle with information, being relayed to them from the drone overhead. One heat signature inside. The target is definitely home. The squad leader motions to the soldiers, gesturing for them to cover the team's flank. Two of his men understand immediately, their rifles raised. The rest of Team 2 form up, waiting for the order to breach the door. But before the words can leave his mouth, one of the men, T2-2, notices the door handle move. He calls out, alerting the others. Their formation tightens. So too does the pressure on the grips of their rifles, just as the target appears from behind the door. The squad leader steadies himself. He knows the target looks like an ordinary woman, or at least she used to. The live feed playing through the goggles affixed to his helmet showed the truth. Huge splotches of red cover most of her face, trailing down her neck and arms, all the way to the fingers that are wrapped around a kitchen knife. The target sweetly, innocently even, welcomes the armed men at her door, inviting them in. The squad leader barks at her to get down on the ground, to drop her weapon. But still, the target insists that the team of heavily armed men in tactical gear just stop being silly, and tells them to come on inside and stay for a while. She takes a half step out of the doorway towards Team 2, knife still firmly in her hand, despite the squad leader's warnings to stay where she is. None of his orders to drop the knife and stay put seem to deter her. T2-4, the closest team member to her, reaches for his belt and slowly unclips a thermite grenade. The Foundation already cleared its use. The target needs to be burned. Then she says something that makes a chill run down the whole team's spines. We just want to have some guests. Please, come in. As far as any of the team can see, there is no we, just the target standing there alone, unless she means we as in the things growing on her face. The squad leader barks at her again, louder than ever, demanding that she drop the knife. The target lunges for T2-4 before he can properly prime the incendiary weapon in his hands. The kitchen knife in her hands is plunged into the gap between where his protective plate carrier ends, carving through his uniform and his flesh underneath. Team 2 opens fire. Scarezilla braces for the shudders traveling up his leg as he kicks hard against the glass. It's old and shatters on impact. The aspiring YouTube star quickly pulls his leg back to avoid the shards that come raining down. He takes care to avoid the edges and any leftover pieces of glass that are still clinging to the frame as he makes his way inside. Urban exploration. That's long been the name of the game for Scarezilla. He's just cracked his first 100,000 subscribers, and it's time to start taking the road to the first million seriously. Only a few years earlier, it had just been a fun way to goof around with friends and visit spooky abandoned buildings. Now, it's suddenly looking like it might be a viable way for Scarezilla to make money. But to take it seriously, he's had to make some choices. Clicking on his flashlight, the bright white beam illuminates the corridor in front of him. Before progressing any further, he pulls two essential items out of his bag, his mask and his new cell phone. The latter is obvious. Without his pride and joy, he'd be lost. The camera shoots in 4K, and its built-in flash was perfect for exploration in dark, abandoned buildings. And streaming live to celebrate 100,000 subscribers would be literally impossible without it. The other is the result of a tip his dad gave him when he started taking this YouTuber thing seriously. Buy an asbestos mask. The dangerous thing about a lot of old buildings isn't just the risk of injury, it's that they tend to contain materials that are real hazardous to your health. So Scarezilla's dad gave him some free advice to get an asbestos mask, and then write it off as a business expense when tax time comes around. Slipping the mask and tightening the straps, Scarezilla sets up the stream and starts to give an intro to the folks watching from the comfort of their bedrooms. A lapel mic is clipped to his shirt, catching more of his voice so it's not too muffled by the mask. He welcomes his subscribers to another killer stream, a handful of comments of support cheering Scarezilla on and getting him amped up for the stream. Something moves. The sounds of something alive echo down the deserted corridor. Scarezilla jumps, visibly reacting to the people watching his stream, but quickly writes the noise off. It was probably a rat. A few more viewers join the stream as Scarezilla starts heading off down the corridor. He peers into rooms, leading with the phone, casting its light over the empty hospital that has started to rust and rot. The hospital looks exactly like it did when it was first abandoned, like everyone just walked out and disappeared one day. Parts have been scorched to almost a cinder. Scarezilla remembers reading that there had been a forest fire in the area that wiped out most of the small town. Wandering through places like this, it's hard for Scarezilla to ignore just how isolated he is. Once upon a time, he and his friends would have been exploring places like this together, searching out creepy buildings that they'd heard ghost stories about. They would usually bring along bats and spray paint to add to the vandalism that already covered the place. But he'd let them all go now. Scarezilla was his brand, a burgeoning career, and he couldn't let anyone hold him back from that. Not even his friends. Still, he wasn't entirely alone thanks to his chat. The comments are pouring in now. A few viewers make donations that allow them to play sounds on the stream. The first is, of course, a loud, horrified scream, audio lifted right out of a horror movie. It's easy to laugh it off, having fully anticipated that the viewers watching would try to throw him off and scare him. And hey, they're welcome to try as far as Scarezilla is concerned. Each donation is still cash in his pocket. He cuts through wards of vacant hospital beds, panning the phone's camera over them, trying to ignore the commenters mentioning that it was almost certain that some patients would have died in those beds. Then another noise distracts Scarezilla, not one from the stream on his phone, but something toppling over in the next room. He freezes. Nothing that's been left still in an abandoned place falls over all on its own. Something has to knock it over. He tries to tell himself it's just another rat, but the viewers on the stream have heard it too, and like an enthusiastic audience, they want to see what caused it. Knowing full well that nothing is likely to jump out of the dark and attack him, Scarezilla reluctantly exits the ward he'd been in. He crosses through another empty, burned corridor towards the room the sound had come from. Sure enough, an old stand for an IV bag seems to have fallen to the ground. Peering around the room with the tiny white LED of his phone, Scarezilla tries to see what had caused it. A dark shape shoots out from under a hospital bed. Scarezilla feels it racing over his foot and screams, dropping his phone screen down, the camera facing the ceiling. The light from the flash catches an enormous, engorged rat as it scurries out of the room. Scarezilla sighs in relief, then braces himself for the inevitable roasting from his commenters. Reaching for his phone and flipping it over, announcing that it had just been a rodent of unusual size, he expects to see messages mocking the scream he let out. But instead, the comments all seem to be discussing something else, barely interested in what had happened to Scarezilla. The chat is alive with comments about the ceiling. Strange dark circles. At UrbexFan420, ew, what is all that stuff? At SpookyWatcher237, gross, is that mold? At Here in My Garage 7 replied, nah man, that's just from where the building got char-grilled. At DrBob68 replied, there's something up with that ceiling, dude. What are all those dark circles? Scarezilla cranes his neck to look at the ceiling, where the phone camera had been pointing to only a moment ago. There's nothing there. It's a little worse for wear, but hardly anything unusual for an abandoned building. And there are no signs of any of the dark circles that his commenters were talking about. Thinking he's figured out what's going on, the urban explorer sighs and playfully scolds his chat for trying to trick him, ignoring their insistent comments to turn around, look at the ceiling. At user Ailana, I'm telling you, Zilla, look, there's something up there, you're not safe. Brushing it off, Scarezilla announces that he's leaving the empty hospital. He's found himself feeling cold all of a sudden, and feels an overwhelming need to drive home where he can turn up the thermostat. But he assures his commenters the stream isn't about to end. In fact, he keeps it rolling as he leaves the abandoned building, gets in the car, and for the entire journey home, he'd never normally give out details of his home address, but for some reason, Scarezilla wants to see as many people as possible, as fast as possible. He points out landmarks and turnings, giving the most accurate directions as he can to his audience, telling them to come to his house for an impromptu meet and greet with his fans. Comments start pouring in, opportunists and trolls discussing their plans to show up. Only a few minutes after Scarezilla makes it home and turns up the heat, the first of his viewers arrives. Then more show up, and more, until there's almost a few hundred spilling out of the house and onto the front lawn. And though none of them know it, although none of them can see it, that's how it spreads. Following an incident of an internet streamer exhibiting unusual behavior, the SCP Foundation moved in to investigate. Samples gathered from the streamer's home and later examined by the Foundation would eventually lead to the direct discovery of another outbreak of SCP-020. The anomaly was discovered quite by accident, as it is impossible to observe SCP-020 with the naked eye. It was only thanks to Foundation forensic teams armed with cameras taking photographs of the affected areas that the presence of this anomaly could be verified, after it was confirmed to not be the result of malfunctioning equipment. It appears that through some unknown anomalous means, SCP-020 is only visible through the use of cameras. Whether this is through capturing photographs or recording video footage of areas or individuals afflicted with the anomaly. Researchers have found themselves unable to determine exactly what causes this active camouflage, with some debate among different camps of Foundation personnel assigned to study SCP-020. Theories range far and wide, with one school of thought positing that the anomaly itself contains anti-memetic properties, leading to an investigation from the Foundation's experts in memetic anomalies, the results of which proved to be inconclusive. Spectral analysts have instead insisted that SCP-020 is somehow able to shield itself from view by reflecting all forms of light away from it, or at least those that are on the spectrum visible to human beings. Once again, there seems to be little evidence supporting this claim. The idea is, however, at least more plausible than some of the further outlandish claims made about SCP-020, including one researcher proposing that the anomaly was actually a series of beings that originated from an entirely flat alternate universe lacking three-dimensional space. This claim has been widely discredited by the SCP Foundation and dismissed as likely caused by the influence of psychoactive drugs, the discovery of which caused the dismissal of the researcher who proposed the theory. They were, however, right about one thing. SCP-020 most certainly is alive. SCP-020 is an anomalous fungus, an organism that is not only capable of spreading at a concerningly rapid pace, but that can affect both inorganic and organic matter. Traces of the fungus, and even samples of entire colonies, have been found on surfaces like walls and ceilings, as well as growing on or in living organisms. As well as the aforementioned innate anomalous effect that renders it invisible to direct observation, the fungus has also been known to directly affect the other senses. It even has a degree of influence over behavior to the living organisms that come into contact with it. SCP-020 is not only capable of small-scale growth within a human residence, its development is not impeded by the varying interior temperatures or levels of light found inside houses, apartments, and other similar locations. This has been regarded by botanical experts within the Foundation Anomalous Horticulture Research Department as atypical for a fungus. Most forms of fungi are known to develop better in low light conditions, as well places that are particularly damp and warm, as colder temperatures render them inert. The way that SCP-020 is seemingly unaffected by the level of light present in a human home lends some credibility to the theory that this fungus is unaffected by light on the visible spectrum. While the exact cause of this invisibility has still not been determined, it has lent itself to the colloquial name for, among researchers, the unseen mold. Once a colony of this anomalous mold has formed within a person's home, the next stage of its life cycle will commence. Spores are released from the fungus, which are similarly impossible to perceive with the naked eye. However, during testing and observation with video surveillance of SCP-020 samples, Foundation researchers have been able to determine that there is a pattern to how these spores behave once released, and how those affected by them behave. Whether the spores make direct contact with skin or are unknowingly inhaled, they will cause a rapid change in the affected person's frontal lobe, the part of the brain responsible for being the behavioral and emotional control center. The specific change that is triggered by the spores is universally the same, regardless of the human subject that is affected by SCP-020. An affected subject will find themselves starting to feel cold, suggesting that the spores are able to directly affect a specific area of the brain's parietal lobe, the somatosensory cortex. Any Foundation neurology expert will tell you that this is the area of the brain that assesses and processes touch-based sensations from all over the body, including position, pressure, pain, and, crucially, temperature. Being told by their somatosensory cortex that they are experiencing heightened cold, the SCP-020 spores are able to compel the affected subject to increase the levels of heat, and humidity within their home. This is usually achieved with the aid of thermostats and other home heating technology, but the Foundation is aware of several cases of SCP-020 colonies forming in rented accommodations without adequate heating facilities. Researchers are still impressed and a little alarmed at the methods employed by spore-affected individuals who are able to successfully raise temperature and humidity levels in these environments. Now, raising the temperature of a room due to feeling cold is hardly considered to be an abnormal behavior, even if it's triggered by the presence of anomalous fungal spores. In the case of those affected with SCP-020, however, their compulsion to make their living space warmer and more humid isn't done just to keep the cold at bay. While they might believe that their actions are their own and that they're raising the temperature as they normally would, in actuality, the affected individuals are turning their homes into a more suitable habitat for the unseen mold, and turning themselves into a more suitable habitat. The SCP Foundation's Botany Division has confirmed that, just like non-anomalous fungi, the colonies of SCP-020 grow more rapidly in environments that are sufficiently moist and warm. However, the effects of SCP-020 spores on a human brain are not solely limited to altering the temperature and creating better conditions for the unseen mold to grow, but also by helping it to spread. When the frontal lobe has been affected by SCP-020's spores, a subject will feel a compulsive urge to engage socially with other human beings as frequently and in as large a capacity as possible. This behavioral shift, which can be difficult to detect in many already extroverted or socially active subjects, typically manifests in the arranging of group gatherings at the residence where the SCP-020 colony is present. Friends and family members to even acquaintances and co-workers of those infected with the unseen mold will likely be on the receiving end of repetitive and insistent invitations to join the affected individual at their home. Attending any of these proposed gatherings, these people will be unaware of the infestation of SCP-020 thanks to them being unable to perceive it. However, unbeknownst to them, their attendance will allow the invisible, anomalous fungus to spread, as spores from the mold colonies from around the affected person's residence affix to guests' clothes. In some cases, camera imagery has revealed that the spores can land on these attendees' skin, and new colonies of SCP-020 will develop and grow directly on their bodies. This is usually characterized by severe reddish, almost beetroot-colored splotches appearing on the skin. However, these are, as mentioned, only visible through photographs or video footage. Even with the spores now spread to new locations through new carriers, the SCP-020 colonies at the original residence will not stop producing spores. This will continue at an exorbitant rate until the amount of spores and colonies of unseen mold present at a location reaches a critical level of concentration. When this happens, the spores' effects on the initial infected subject will rapidly become more extreme. Their overall health will begin to deteriorate, resulting in death after a short period of time. However, once the affected subject has expired, they still pose a risk of spreading an SCP-020 infection. The mold will continue to grow, remaining invisible on a deceased body, allowing it to spread to any emergency responders, paramedics, healthcare agents, or whoever else might make contact with the affected cadaver. This has also, in numerous cases, led to several colonies of SCP-020 being discovered in morgues and mortuaries, as well as inside vehicles used in the transportation of affected bodies. The Foundation's initial discovery of SCP-020 took place in a civilian home in Redacted, the residence of a woman who worked at a local hospital. Concerns first arose from an undercover Foundation agent embedded within the ranks of the hospital staff, who noted that one of their colleagues was exhibiting a dramatic shift in her personality. Where she had previously been withdrawn and introverted, the woman seemed to be making active, almost aggressive efforts to socialize with as many people as possible, both during her work at the hospital and outside away from the job. The change in behavior, in this case, was so dramatic that it was immediately noticed by the undercover operative in the hospital, and after raising it with a Foundation behavioral specialist, they were able to determine that this change had not been caused by any psychological factor. With the presence of an unknown, at the time, anomalous behavioral infection, Mobile Task Force Eta-10, also known as See No Evil, were dispatched to the home of the affected woman. Unmanned aerial vehicles detected her heat signature from above, and MTF operatives moved to breach the house, only to find the woman standing in the doorway holding a kitchen knife. Video of the incidents showed that 2/3 of her face had been covered by SCP-020 colonies. Audio and video recordings of the mission captured her saying, "We just want to have some guests." Foundation researchers have questioned whether or not there is some previously undiscovered parasitic quality to SCP-020. However, it is unknown if, and to what extent, the unseen mold uses affected persons as a host. Following the Mobile Task Force's termination of the original carrier, an investigation was launched by a Foundation containment team. Through the use of spectral analysis and thorough sweeps of the surrounding areas, the Foundation quickly realized that the problem was far bigger than one woman having been infected. There were hundreds of infectees, thousands of colonies, potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of spores. Video footage and photos showed huge dark spots on the walls, floors, and ceilings, not just of the home that the woman was found in, but the hospital she worked at, any building that she frequented. Far worse, any person that also frequently visited the same places, any of the patients she came into contact with in the hospitals, their families that visited, the doctors, nurses, cleaners. It was almost the whole town. In order to contain the outbreak, the SCP Foundation issued an order permitting the termination of the entire civilian population. The town itself was incinerated, with the cover story of a catastrophic forest fire in place. Any samples of SCP-020 that have been recovered since have been sealed inside cultivation chambers and stored within Biological Research Area 12. The only way to access this sealed-off area is via an airlock. The delivery of nutrients and other essential maintenance to cultivate the anomalous fungus is carried out using remote-controlled robots, ensuring that the chamber itself remains sealed at all times. No human personnel of any level of security clearance are to be permitted entry at any time. Through the use of hermetically sealed video surveillance equipment, research teams assigned to study SCP-020 keep a close eye on the anomalous fungus. Meanwhile, Foundation engineers and containment experts ensure that the air-sealed chamber housing the specimens maintains its integrity. All SCP Foundation personnel who enter the vicinity of the containment chamber must be fitted with full Biosafety Level 5 equipment. This includes the appropriate rebreathers. Upon exit of the area, they must submit to a full antifungal disinfection treatment. There have been reports of at least 12 separate outbreaks of unseen mold. The Foundation is continuing to investigate the possible source of the fungus and develop preventative measures. However, at present, there is no known way to counteract the effects of an SCP-020 infection in humans.